A Karen teacher demands I take off my hijab, claiming it violates the school's no hoods policy. But her ignorance and discrimination lead to her losing her job. Here's what happened. I was just a regular high school student, trying to make my way through the day without any trouble. I'm a hijabi, which means I wear a hijab on my head every day. I'm not ashamed of it, it's a part of who I am. But apparently to some people, it makes me look suspicious. And that's exactly what happened when I had a run-in with a certain Karen teacher. It was a regular day at school, and I was running late for my math class. As I was hurrying to my seat, I could see my teacher, Mrs. Karen, giving me a strange look. But I didn't pay much attention to it and just sat down. That's when she suddenly walked over to my desk and said, "Excuse me, but you can't wear hoods in my class. You're going to have to take that off." I was confused at first, but then I realized what she was talking about. My hijab, which is not a hood, was covering my head. "It's not a hood, it's a hijab," I said. "I don't care what it is, no hoods allowed," she replied, crossing her arms. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been wearing my hijab for years, and no one had ever told me that it was against the rules. "But it's not a hood, it's a religious head covering. It's a part of my faith," Mrs. Karen let out a loud scoff. "Religion or not, you're not allowed to wear hoods in my class," she said with a huff. I was getting really upset now. "But you can't tell me to take it off. It's a part of who I am." Mrs. Karen let out a long sigh before continuing. "Listen, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I just don't see the point of wearing this thing on your head. It's not like it's going to make you smarter or anything. Also, need I not mention, that thing breaks the rules." I could feel my blood boiling. "That's not the point. My hijab is not just a piece of cloth. It's a symbol of my faith and identity." Mrs. Karen just scoffed at me. "Well, it's not important in my classroom. And besides, I think you're just using it as an excuse to wear those AirPods in class." "What? That's ridiculous. I don't wear AirPods in class," I retorted. "Sure you don't. I bet you have them on right now," she said, pointing to my ears. I was so angry at this point. How dare she accuse me of something like that? "I don't have any AirPods on. I'm trying to learn, not listen to music." Mrs. Karen just rolled her eyes. "Whatever you say, but you're still going to have to take it off." "I'm not taking it off," I said defiantly. Mrs. Karen let out an exasperated sigh before continuing. "I just don't understand why you would want to wear something so oppressive. Don't you want to be free and express yourself?" "Excuse me? Oppressive? It's my choice to wear it, bitch. And it's a symbol of my freedom and expression," I said, feeling more and more upset. "I just don't think it's necessary to wear it all the time. You should be able to show your face and hair like everyone else," she said, her tone becoming more and more condescending. I was getting fed up with her ignorance. "It's not about showing my face or hair. It's about my religious beliefs and identity. It's a part of who I am, and I shouldn't have to change that just to make you comfortable, you dumbass." "Did you just call me a dumbass?" Mrs. Karen let out a long sigh before responding. "I just don't understand why you would want to wear something that's so different from what everyone else is wearing. It makes you stand out, and not in a good way, sweetie." "Okay, you're going too far. That's not true. My hijab is beautiful, and it's a part of my cultural and religious heritage. It's not something to be ashamed of," I said, trying to remain calm, knowing full well I'ma get this teacher in big trouble. Mrs. Karen's face twisted into a sneer. "I'm sorry, but I just can't let you wear it in my class. It's against the rules, and you're going to have to take it off." "I'm not taking it off, and you can't make me," I said, standing up and gathering my things. Mrs. Karen crossed her arms and looked at me with a cold stare. "Fine, then you can leave my classroom." As I gathered my things, Mrs. Karen leaned in and whispered, "And by the way, you look pretty scary with that thing on your head." I was mortified. How could she say something like that to me? I stormed out of the classroom and headed straight to the principal's office. When I got there, I was fuming. I told the principal everything that had happened and how Mrs. Karen had treated me. And not to my surprise, the principal was extremely sympathetic and understanding. "I'm sorry that this happened to you, and I'm going to deal with this," the principal said. "We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind here at our school. If what you're saying is true and it did happen, I sincerely apologize for this mess." The principal immediately called Mrs. Karen down to the office, and I was able to tell her side of the story. Mrs. Karen was defensive at first, insisting that she was just following the rules. But when the principal pointed out that my hijab was not a hood and was a religious head covering, Mrs. Karen's attitude changed. "I had no idea," she said, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend anyone." "Not good enough. What is seriously wrong with you?" The principal immediately took action and fired Mrs. Karen for her discriminatory behavior. The principal issued a public statement condemning all forms of discrimination and vowed to make the school a safe and welcoming place for all students, regardless of their background or beliefs. After Mrs. Karen was fired, the school hired a new teacher who was trained in cultural competency and diversity, ensuring that all students would be treated with respect and dignity. It's honestly saddening to me how mainstream media was able to make people be ignorant about my religion. It's so frustrating to hear about people like Karen who just don't understand the beauty and significance of cultural and religious diversity. OP, you did such an amazing job standing up for yourself and your beliefs in the face of discrimination. It's terrible to hear that you had to go through this kind of treatment from a teacher who should have known better. It's really infuriating how Mrs. Karen just refused to listen to OP and kept insisting on her own misguided views. And the fact that she called OP scary with her hijab on is just plain unacceptable. No one should be made to feel that way because of their cultural or religious background. I'm so glad to hear that the principal took immediate action and fired Mrs. Karen for her discriminatory behavior. And the fact that the school hired a new teacher who is trained in cultural competency and diversity is a huge step forward. It's important that all students feel safe and welcomed at school, and that includes respecting their cultural and religious beliefs. What do you all think about this absurd situation? Have you ever experienced discrimination because of your cultural or religious background? Let me know in the comments below. A Karen tried to defend her son after he pulled my friend's hijab off, arguing that he was just practicing his freedom of speech. Here's what happened. This happened to a good friend of mine back in middle school. We will call my friend Habibti, feminine form of the Arabic word for sweetie because she's such a sweet girl. Entitled jerk will be jerk, and of course the entitled mom will be Karen per tradition. In 8th grade, Habibti decided to wear hijab. At a school in which she was now the only hijabi, this drew attention. Some people were so nice about it and told her how lovely and pretty her hijabs looked on her, but others were nasty and Islamophobic. Habibti took everything in stride and treated everyone with kindness regardless. For me, 8th grade was the year of the 2008 election. American history was the social studies course for 8th grade, so a lot of the election was discussed in class. Habibti and I were both in the honors class, and unfortunately, so was Jerk. Jerk was very outspoken in class, and I must say, his commitment to his political cause was admirable, in ways, even though his views were polar opposite mine. One view in particular was his anti-Muslim stance. He would make despicable comments such as, all Muslims are terrorists, and other predictably Islamophobic rhetoric, and he would always stare daggers at Habibti when he made those comments. I don't think he even knew Habibti was a Muslim until she put on hijab. Once she did, he targeted her a lot. He would harass her in class. He would ask her if she was hiding a bomb in her hijab. He would cup his hands around his mouth and go, "Jihad!" when she walked into class. On the anniversary of 9/11, he was talking about how Habibti was going to celebrate it. I remember him saying, "You love bin Laden," and things of that nature. During lunch, Habibti was allowed to be excused to pray Zuhr. Jerk would mock her for it. Habibti never took it to heart. She never even harbored resentment. She treated Jerk with the same kindness she showed to everyone else. One day Jerk went too far. He wound up walking behind Habibti in the hallway and suddenly pulled her hijab off. Habibti was wearing a hijab cap underneath and Jerk was not successful at fully pulling the hijab off since she had it wrapped and pinned well. But the act was unacceptable. Habibti screamed. I was at my locker probably 10 yards away, and while I didn't see it happen, I turned and saw Habibti scrambling to cover and Jerk laughing and running off, making celebratory whoops. Habibti was in tears. I was furious. This next part I wasn't present for, but Habibti filled me in on the whole story. Habibti went to the office directly and reported what had happened. Jerk was summoned to the office immediately, and his mother was called. She showed up at the school a bit later, and of course her reaction to her son being in trouble was of the typical entitled mother nature. The principal explained what had occurred, and that Jerk would be receiving a suspension because his actions were discriminatory and hateful, which was not tolerated in the slightest. I was obviously not present for the conversation, so I'm not going to make something up, but I remember the main points of it. Karen was furious that her son was in trouble and was yelling viciously at the principal. She defended her son's actions. She cited freedom of speech, which is one of the most infuriatingly ridiculous things I've personally ever heard. She even went as far as saying that her son was the person experiencing discrimination since he was a conservative, and bitterly spat about the school having a liberal bias. She was threatening to tell the newspapers that her son was being punished for doing nothing wrong, and blah blah blah. The principal gave Habibti a chance to tell her account of what was done to her by Jerk throughout the year. She even tried to explain why hijab was important to her, and how it would be like someone pulling down Jerk's pants. How would he like that? Both Jerk and his mom were glaring at her the whole time. Jerk called himself a hero, and said he was fighting terrorism. Karen said something to the effect of, "You should be thanking him for standing up for America." Of course the principal was having none of it, and the punishment was firm, and if he was found harassing Habibti again, he would face expulsion. This put Jerk and Karen over the edge, and both of them started verbally attacking Habibti with slurs, and telling her to go back to Afghanistan and live in a cave with your leader, referring to bin Laden. The principal had had enough. He told Karen to leave at once or he was calling the authorities to report her for hate and for harassing a minor. After that, Jerk backed down a little, but still made comments. Habibti has proudly worn hijab ever since, and has always exemplified what a true Muslim is. She has done more charity work and service to the community than anyone I know, and graduated from a top university, and is now a medical student with hopes to do medical mission work abroad. Oh my goodness, can you believe the audacity of Karen and Jerk in this story? I mean seriously, how could they be so cruel and insensitive to poor Habibti? The fact that Jerk would mock her and make such disgusting comments about her religion and culture is bad enough, but then to physically assault her by pulling off her hijab? That's just insane. And then Karen's reaction? I mean, really, freedom of speech? That's just a pathetic excuse for her son's behavior. And to claim that he was the one being discriminated against? Give me a break. The principal was right to punish him, and I'm glad that Habibti had the courage to speak up and defend herself. It's so heartwarming to hear that despite all of this, Habibti has stayed true to herself and her faith. It's amazing to see how she has turned such a negative experience into something positive by doing charity work and going on medical missions. What an incredible person. What do you all think about this absurd situation? Let me know in the comments. Random mother is very entitled and believes she has the authority to check my ID and stop me from leaving a store. I have just started university in Swansea, Wales, UK. I live and grew up in London, England, and we don't get many Karens in the UK, especially in London, because people just don't have time for that shit. That being said, I would have expected for it to be more likely to have this interaction in London as opposed to Swansea. When I came here, I assumed that being a predominantly white area, I would encounter some racism being of South Asian descent with brown skin. But I was pleasantly surprised to find everyone is really nice and helpful, and much more welcoming than London. There was one incident though in a Beefeater restaurant. It's like a weird restaurant with a pub bar attached to a 3-star hotel chain in the UK, where everyone was staring at me as I moved about and I defo felt the xenophobic vibes. Anyway, I'm at the big Tesco in town, supermarket chain. The company owned Fresh and Easy in the US, and I'm buying some food and homewares like frying pans and stuff, and with that I'm buying a load of alcohol for the flat. I'm talking 2 bottles of Baileys, large bottles of vodka and white rum, Disaronno, an 18-pack of Corona, Jägermeister as well as Coke, Red Bull and soda water. It's not enough to fill a bar, but still a fair bit for one person to buy. As I'm paying at the till, checkout, I have my driving license as ID ready to show the cashier. I'm 19, yet I have a pretty babyish face and I'm pretty small, so I always expect to get ID'd. But for some reason the guy doesn't ask to see my ID, and I pay and start loading my shopping back into my trolley. As I'm doing so, the woman behind me with her teenager, maybe 15-17-year-old, starts speaking to the cashier. She was English, not Welsh, and the tone of her voice told me everything I needed to know immediately. Karen alert. She starts whining scolding him, asking why he didn't check my ID. The young cashier also seemed to realize this wasn't going to be fun interaction and responds saying that I've shopped here before and he knows that I am of age. IDK if that was bullshit or not though, because I don't recall seeing him before. The woman continues to berate him, telling him it sets a bad example to her kid because it shows him that he can get away with buying drinks underage and using fake IDs. If you see a situation like that, just teach your son not to do that. Don't come at me when you know no facts. At this point, I'm done loading my shopping and decide not to engage and leave. She instantly forgets the cashier and blocks my way, asking me to show her my ID and my bank card. I politely tell her she has no right, and she then loses her shit. She doesn't scream or raise her voice significantly, but her tone becomes incredibly aggressive, and she starts pointing the finger at me and accusing me of buying alcohol whilst underage. I tell her I am of age and have every right to purchase what I just did, and if she has an issue, she can go find the manager because she, a fellow customer in the store, has no jurisdiction over me. The cashier himself decides to call for a manager and apologizes to me. I notice the kid now and he gives me a stern look, but I'm pretty sure it was just to side with his mum and that he was also uncomfortable about the whole ordeal. The manager comes over and asks the cashier what's wrong and low, and behold, the unbearable bitch interrupts the lad and starts berating the manager. The manager listens a little, stops her for a sec and turns to me and asks for ID. I give it to him. He checks it. He's happy, but as he goes to hand it back, the woman snaps at him with an expectant look on her face and says something like, "Sorry, but I'd like to check it myself." Not even a please. He gives it back to me anyway, which triggers a visible storm of anger within her, and she then proceeds to block his way and starts scolding him about poor customer service, illegal business activity, etc. The cashier tells me to leave, and I do so because it's 9 p.m. and I really can't be arsed to deal with this. I hope that woman was kicked out or something, and if so, I'm sad I didn't witness it, but dear God, I feel sorry for that poor kid. Okay, first of all, can we just take a moment to appreciate how crazy this Karen is? Like, who in their right mind thinks they have the authority to check someone's ID and stop them from leaving a store? And then to go on and berate the cashier and manager and accuse the OP of buying alcohol underage. It's just absurd. I mean, I get it. We all have our own moral codes and want to make sure that people are following the law. But there's a way to go about it, and this Karen clearly did not know how to do that. Instead, she just made herself look like a complete fool and probably ruined her own day as well as the OP's. I'm so glad that the cashier and manager were on the OP's side and that they were able to defuse the situation. And I hope that Karen learned her lesson and won't be trying to play cop at the grocery store again anytime soon. Anyways, you should watch the video on screen where OP's entitled family forces him out of his own house to give it to his sister. Yeah, that's just insane.